Hello, this is Joshua Landis, Director for the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and I write SyriaComment.com. It's a daily newsletter or blog about Syria every day. And I am talking with...
I'm Ausama Monajed. I'm a Syrian political activist, and I do the Syrian Revolution Daily News Roundup. And also been active in the opposition and the uprising from inside and outside for some time.
And it is today, it is June 17th, Friday.
Yes, indeed, and it's one of the biggest day in revolutions, because every Friday is a big day, it's the biggest in the week, and also today is the Saleh Halali Friday. This is the name the activists called it by, in reference to the Alawite leader in the Syrian revolution against the French earlier this century, and this is a message to the Alawite community in the country of how united the Syrian opposition or revolution against Assad is.
Now, let me ask you, Assama, let me ask you where this uprising stands. I mean, for 3 months now, over 3 months, this has been going on. It's been getting increasingly, it's getting worse. The death rate has been going up. There's about 1,500, 600 killed so far. We're not sure. There are 8,000 refugees in Turkey. There's intense pressure on the Syrian regime right now. We just saw the president's cousin, Rami Makhlouf, say that he was divesting some of his interests, broad economic interests, and that he was going to give some of this back to the Syrian people. Is this, are we seeing the regime beginning to crack? Is this the first family beginning to crack, or is this not something different?
Well, the regime is certainly cracking. The pressure is mounting tremendously on the regime. It's not only because of Makhlouf's story, but also look at the state of the army now. They are exhausted. State of the security forces, they are exhausted. They're trying to hire...
Explain that.
I mean, I'll give you one example how the buses arrived in the morning today in some of the areas and towns in the Damascus suburbs. And the first thing the security forces did when they got out of the buses is that they rested on the side and took a nap, you know, just before the Friday prayer, because they are exhausted. These buses have been bringing the security forces troops from long distances, and it is you know, certainly exhausting for them. They're not taking leaves. They've been
let me be counter. Let me just play devil's advocate.
Okay.
You have an army, a Syrian army, let's say, is 500,400,000. But at the top of this army, you have a heavy concentration at the top ranks of Alawite officers who are going to remain loyal to this regime. You have the Palace Guard, or the Republican Guard, which is about 20,000 strong under the president's brother, Maher al-Assad. You have the 4th Division, which is, I guess, also led by Maher, but has tanks, Gazelle, helicopters. This is a tough army. It has remained firm behind the president. It's not Egypt. It's not Tunisia. Armies that turned against the president. Now, yes, there are defections at the lower ranks and the enlisted men. We've seen a number of people go to Turkey and so forth. But this has been dribs and drabs. You know, these are small numbers. There hasn't been any major defections, certainly not any upper ranks. And so what if some people defect? I mean, you could take the attitude of, yes, but they can't reform as an army. There is no military option for the opposition.
Well, there is I mean, let me clarify a few points here, Josh. No one expected the revolution to start even, or to spark, let alone to carry on all these weeks. And you're one of them, Josh. I remember you writing that why Syria is different than Tunisia and Egypt. In fact, it turned out that Syria is no different. It is joining the Arab uprising. That's number one. Number two, when we say that kind of prediction doesn't work all the time accurately, and what the analysts say, what we say is that the army will defect at the top, you know, a high-ranking position, but not now. Perhaps when things reach a critical stage.
So you expect that if you can keep up the pressure.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when things reach a cliff side, the top army generals, chiefs, and also the leaders, the social leaders of the Alawite community would not carry on the support of the regime. They would give up support to Assad family in particular, and whoever those associated with them at the top niche there. They would push them off the cliff and save themselves, because otherwise they don't want to hold the whole minority.
But you're making
hostage.
a big presumption here. You're making a big presumption.
If you let me just continue.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
They are holding the whole Alawite minority as a hostage now, and they know it. They do not want the Alawite to be targeted later or be always for decades to come in Syria's future to be associated with the thugs and mafia of the Assad rule. Now, we've seen similar cases after Hariri, and after the Millis report, when it was released, how top army chiefs and security even forces put their villas and palaces for sale. They transferred millions of dollars through Turkey, Lebanon, and some Gulf countries to abroad, and they literally backed and waited for the right moment to leave, because they knew the international pressure was imminent. They knew that the United States was at the doorsteps. They knew that the international community is going to be serious about doing something. Now, we all know how the most sensitive pressure that the Syrian regime is towards the international community, and how they watch very closely and observe very closely every statement and every move and every resolution. Now, that being said, this critical moment is not close yet. We're not there yet, and this is a long-term struggle. We're not, hoping for a couple of days and things will be over. We are prepared to carry on the struggle for weeks or perhaps months to come. And whoever losing this battle, time-wise, is the regime. Because they are exhausted now, their personnel are exhausted, this is costing them a lot of money, and even the hard currency sources of funds is drying up. The main source of foreign currencies of the regime in the national budget, is the tourism, 24-25% of the national budget, and this is now zero. The second source.
Okay, but let me just jump on the economic situation here and say that the Economist intelligence unit just came out with an article yesterday saying that Syria might, that oil exports are actually up a teeny bit, that gas exports are up, that Syria has means and can limp along. And many people in the regime are quite confident that they are going to exhaust you before you exhaust them. They have the resources.
Throughout history,
military power,
history,
they have, just a second, let me finish, that they have the military power and that they are holding strong. And, like Lebanon, which had several summers when it didn't have any tourist thing at the middle of its civil war, its currency held up. It withstood the economic pressures. Now, Syria has known hard times before, they say. We are going to weather this. And there's really not another alternative. And that the upper classes that you say, the main supporters of this regime are the minorities, but they're also the Sunni middle classes from the cities. And this has been the argument, that the people from Damascus and Aleppo have not joined the opposition. They have stayed with this regime, and there hasn't been a real sectarian split. Despite all the talk about growing sectarianism, there hasn't been. The Sunni upper classes, and we saw this in a big demonstration yesterday or 2 days ago in Damascus on Flag Day, where they had the 2-point-something kilometer flag. But throughout Mezze, Autostrad, this big demonstration. Now, we can say a lot of that was trumped up by the regime, but they're clearly Syrians are very torn. And in the heart of upper middle class Sunni Damascus, a big pro-regime demonstration. People are frightened of the growing insecurity. They realize it's going to be a long struggle, but they're not. There's a long way to go before this regime crumbles.
Okay, Josh, let me correct a few things here. Number one, we should not consider those who are not demonstrating as supporters of Assad. This is a silent majority. In every revolution in the world, the participants or those who go on the streets and demonstrate are the very, very tiny minority. I mean, even historians, they consider the French Revolution. I'm not here comparing the type of revolution. I'm comparing the participation only, participation percentage in the public. In the French Revolution, the historians said the maximum number joined was 2%, and this is the largest in history. In Tahrir Square, how many millions were there versus the population of Egypt? A very tiny percentage, about 1 or 1.5% of the population. The largest demonstration in Tunisia, the largest one ever in the capital, was about 50,000 people, because Tunisia is a small country. Now, if you have about 1.2, 1.3 million demonstrators in Syria, that says it all, to be honest. Whoever is able to join the ranks is there. And also, there's one very important, significant point here. If there wasn't, if people are not fearing the arrests, not fearing bullets being shot at them, at their heads, they don't fear snipers, how many thousands more or hundreds of thousands more you'll see demonstrating, Josh? You'll see far more people.
Let me just interfere here for a second.
So that's one thing. I'm just clarifying the point of numbers. So if there was no killing,
but we've seen in Iraq.
Just let me continue. If there are no killings and no massacres committed against peaceful demonstrators, you'll see far more huge numbers in the streets. And and even though, despite that, the silent majority will be still a majority. That's why it's called the silent majority. The bigger numbers will remain at homes, and those people do not cause change either way. Anyway, now that's number one on the numbers. On the middle class, we've seen demonstrations almost every day in Damascus, in the heart of Damascus, in Maidan, in Sha'lan, and every Friday. Now today, in Friday, a huge demo in Maidan. And even though you shouldn't expect two big major cities like Damascus and Aleppo, who benefited from the economic openness in the past few years, to join the ranks early stages. Of course, these civic areas or urban areas will join later. And not earlier. Even those in Tahrir Square were not people from Cairo. We both should know that or explain that. They were brought from all over the place. And
Osama, in Iraq and Libya, when we've seen the military remain loyal to the regime, popular demonstrations, even when half of the country fell out of control in Libya, have not been able to turn over the regime. Only foreign intervention. In Iraq, it was the American army that overturned the regime, and in Libya, increasingly, it's going to be the American army again that's going to have to bring down Gaddafi. Why is Syria going to be different?
Because the regime cannot sustain these demonstrations and the deterioration in the economy status for so long. Already the economy is now minus 3%. It was 2% plus, and now it's minus 3%. So it fell down 5% since the uprising.
Let me ask you about opposition. Let me ask you a little bit about opposition activities here. In Antalya, the opposition unanimously voted not, in their statement, they said that there should not be any foreign involvement and not any foreign intervention into Syria. They did not want to be like Iraq or other countries in the region. Now, on the other hand, you and your fellow activists in the West have been working very hard to try to get more important sanctions placed on Syria. In particular, sanctions on Syria's oil and the Safadi heavy crude in particular, because that's the most vulnerable. Syria produces about a third or maybe more than a third of their oil, you correct me if I'm wrong, is this very heavy crude that only a number of refineries in Western Europe can refine. If France, Germany, and I don't know which other countries were willing to stop taking that oil, China, Russia, others could not take it because they don't have the capacity to refine it. Now, is that something that you would like to see Western governments do, is put an embargo on Syrian exports of oil?
Well, we both know that the revenues of the oil in Syria goes directly to the Prime Minister's office and not to the Ministry of Oil or the Ministry of Finance in Syria. So it doesn't get included straight away in the national budget, but less bureaucracy, meaning they are able to shift the funds of the oil, $7 to $8 million a day of that particular crude, the Ministry of Defense and the security forces apparatus, which is out of any question financially. Now, the strategy is to dry up the hard currency of the Syrian regime in order to make them less able to carry on the massacres and atrocities. Now, with the we know that the Syria imports its petrol for cars and diesel, most of it, and also part of it gets refined in Syria for internal consumption. So that is not going to affect, the revenues of heavy crude oil. Is not going, an embargo on that will not going to affect the ordinary Syrians' daily life, because it's not affecting the car petrols or the diesel.
But Osama, if you cut off the government revenues,
yeah.
Isn't the government going to do what's happened in almost every other country with this situation? They're going to begin to use the money that's available to them to pay the people they need to, and it'll be the weakest people in Syria who stop getting money first, and it'll be the most vulnerable.
People in Syria are still. I mean, there is no social security system in the country. They are already not getting anything from the regime. So even if that dried, I mean, it's not going to cause people that much of a difference, to be honest. Do we have the best health system in the world or education system in the world? So if we dried up these sources, that would really be affected dramatically. It makes no sense, because already people are not seeing any difference whether this regime is wealthier or poorer.
If this continues, let's say that the West ramps up sanctions with the demand to do something about the situation in Syria, and yet the Syrian regime is able to withstand this and hang on, as we've seen other countries do in the past. Libya hung on for decades, so did Iraq. Economic sanctions have been unable to bring down regimes in the past. What then becomes ineluctable pressure for military?
We have to be clear, Josh. This is not a UN umbrella sanctions vis-a-vis Iran. This is completely different. This is boycotting or not allowing Western oil companies to buy the heavy crude that Syria exports and use its funds to fund its military operation. It's a completely different matter.
What role do you think Turkey can play in this?
Sorry?
What role do you hope that Turkey will play in the future?
Well, Turkey has been very, very supportive since the beginning, very helpful. Now they're hosting the Syrian refugees. Unfortunately, for the first time, we use the term Syrian refugees. We never had this term before. And we've seen Turkmeni's, Assad's envoy to Turkey's, the visit of Turkmeni failing. They failed to have a joint statement, meaning they didn't have any shared vision to tell the press about. And we know Muallim is now preparing for a diplomatic and kind of political visit after the military one failed. We know that Turkey is taking very clear side with the Syrian people, despite the honeymoon that they gave Assad, and despite all the advices that they gave to Assad to reform, they realize now, as everyone else in the Syrian opposition, that this regime is incapable of reform, incapable of change, incapable of doing anything good to the country, because change and reform means that Bashar is going to put himself in prison, and is going to put his brother in prison, and is going to put all the Rai Makhlouf in prison, and the top army chiefs and security forces chiefs in prison. Who else left there?
There's talk, Osama, about next week possibly an opposition meeting in Damascus with people like Michel Kilo and Loay Hussein, others who've been calling for, opposition leaders who've been calling for some sort of dialogue. I'm not sure if this is going to happen.
Yeah, me too. I don't think this is going to happen, even if it took place. I mean, it's one incident. One conference out of several conferences. We've seen the conference in Antalya that brought about 400 people, the conference in Brussels that brought about 300 people, and we're also planning for a conference in North America to bring the Syrian Americans and Syrian Canadians together. This falls within this whole big spectrum. It is not the conference that's going to lower the bar for the Syrians and not call for Assad to go. This is certainly not the case. And even if that any such a conference took place inside the country, it will certainly have no authority and will lose, all of these people will lose their reputation in the country, because the whole demand in the spectrum of all the demonstrators inside is chanting, people want to topple the regime, and they will not go back home until they see it happen.
Do you expect sectarianism to get worse as this process grinds forward? In many ways, it hasn't gotten terrible in Syria in the sense that, but you see the rising sectarian tensions with chants, anti-Shiite chants amongst some of the demonstrators.
Well, Josh,
some people suggest that if you're going to be successful, you're going to have to split the Sunnis from the Alawites. The Alawites are going to remain loyal, or at least many of them will. And that what you need to do is to get the upper Sunni middle class, the business classes who remained loyal to this regime and who fear civil war and who fear, violence in the future, that those people are going to have to be convinced to abandon this regime. And to do that, we've seen in the past, in places like Iraq or Lebanon, it's been growing sectarianism. Now, I know that the opposition, and particularly the secular activists, such as yourself in the West, have sort of drawn a red line and said, no, we're not going to go sectarian. How do you avoid that and still, get this split? I mean, don't you need to have that split?
Well, number one, it is not sectarian, Josh, infighting. You've seen it, how even if there are very, very minor, very micro-isolated incidents, we talk to these people straight away and we explain to them the importance of keeping it united and the significance and the risk of falling actually in the regime trap by turning this into sectarian strife. The regime is desperate to turn this whole uprising and revolution into a sectarian conflict, because then they can legitimize their oppression. They are desperate to turn this revolution into an armed conflict from both sides. They're desperate, but people are very, very been very aware of it, and they kept it peaceful until this moment.
But doesn't growing sectarianism undermine the regime? The regime has built itself on this ta'ayyush and the notion that it's made alliances with Sunnis, with Christians,
it's made itself,
Israelis, Druze.
It made itself by giving the impression and also assigning posts to Alawites. Everyone knows it's a minority rule in Syria. I mean, who do we are here to fool? It's a minority rule against the majority Sunnis. And despite all of that, and I hate to talk, the sectarian talk or differentiating, the Syrian revolution has named one of the Fridays as Azadi Friday, in reference to the Kurds. One of the Fridays as the Good Friday, is reference to the Christians in the Easter week. And we named this Friday as Saleh Ali Friday, as referring here to the Alawite leader in the Syrian revolution against the French. We're doing we're sending all the right messages. We're doing all the right acts to make sure that our message is very clear within the minorities in the country, that this is a united front against oppression, against sectarianism, against dictatorship in the country. Now, that being said, the regime, as I said, is very eager to push people towards that. It's not sectarian. And we've seen the bishop giving addressing the crowds of Sunnis. We've seen the Sunni scholars addressing demonstrators, Christian demonstrators in parts of Hamas. So we've seen that all. Now, the regime wants to give that impression. Whoever picking this in the Western media that this is a sectarian conflict is just playing on the regime's lines and giving aid to the regime. Now,
you're insisting there's not going to be a military. There's not going to be a resort to arms by the opposition.
Oh, certainly not. Certainly not. However,
now you're
there's
expecting
only
that
the only incidents. If you let me
pure popular
explain,
numbers,
Joshua,
that you're going to overturn this regime.
The only incidents where arms were used is where the army officers, junior or mid ranks, defected and they use their weapons to defend themselves or secure certain passages for the refugees to go to Turkey. And we keep telling even defected soldiers, do not use your arms. Abandon your weapons and join the crowds. Abandon your weapons and join the crowds and do not fire back.
Now, the Syrian government has been pretty insistent that in Jisr Shahur there was a real ambush that went on, and that soldiers were ambushed by people who were laying in wait.
What's the source? Syrian state TV? Who believes that? Why don't they allow international mainstream media in the country to document this or to interview people and to film that? We cannot trust them. We cannot trust what they say, and no one in the country trusts unless apart from a very tiny majority what they say. So,
do you think the country is sliding towards civil war, or do you think they're going to avoid it?
It is certainly not a civil war. Syrians have showed a tremendous amount of wisdom and depth in their thinking. They showed a tremendous amount of unity. They've been saying all the right messages. They've been chanting all the right slogans throughout this revolution, and this will carry on. This will carry on. You've seen the banners in French, in Russian, in English, and Chinese. The big banners that we will not use arms even if you killed us all. This is very clear. It says it all. Another banner saying, we will not fall in your trap. Do not waste your time. This has been translated in several languages. So whoever is eager to give the impression that this is a sectarian conflict is the regime only. And whoever falls within the lines of the regime and wants to obviously play its mouth, and all the videos, all the incidents, all the stories, all the chanting, all the banners is telling us a completely different story.
Well, Ausama Monajed, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today and discussing the progress of this.
Thank you, Josh. My pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.